So parents, there's been a lot of talk lately about smartphone addiction in our kids. But what you may not know is that there are some kids who are more at risk for becoming addicted to these devices. And in this video, I'm going to share with you parents what to look for so you'll know whether or not your child may be more at risk for smartphone addiction. I'm Dr. Mike Fraser, and I'm a clinical psychologist with over 30 years of experience working with other people's kids, and I have 3 of my own. So what's the big deal about smartphones? What's the big deal about screens? Right? Not all children are addicted to these devices. So what's the difference? If you're a parent and you have more than one child and you notice they all don't respond the same way to screens. Some of your kids may be able to play a video game and turn it off without a problem. Other kids start a video game and it becomes an argument when their parents tell them it's time to turn it off. It becomes an argument when their parents tell them it's time to go to bed, something they should be able to do every single day. So what's the difference? In my experience in the therapy room working with children and teenagers, I am seeing firsthand what the research and the growing body of research is starting to show. There are certain classifications of children, there are certain kids with certain diagnoses who are much more at risk. So parents, pay attention to what I'm telling you here because these are the diagnoses and these are the things that I want you to be looking out for. So if you have a child that has ADD, ADHD, a learning disability, autism spectrum disorder, depression, or anxiety, I would pay very close attention to putting a screen in their hands. And I would pay very close attention to how often they're spending in front of those screens, how they're using those screens, because a lot of those children are using those screens to cope with the stress of school, to cope with the stress of social problems that they might be having, or they're coping with certain things that are going on at home, and their coping skills off of the screens are poorly developed. And so those types of children, I've noticed in the therapy room, have a much more difficult time turning them off. They have a much more difficult time establishing and paying attention to limits. They have a much more difficult time adhering to limits that their parents set for them. And as a result, there are a lot of problems, and it just adds more stress to their life. So I want to be clear about something. I don't believe that screens cause addiction in everybody that picks one up. Not everyone gets addicted to smartphones. And in one of my earlier videos, I talked about the hallmarks of addiction, withdrawal and tolerance. But not all children show those symptoms when it's time to turn it off or put it away. So what are you looking for, parents, in your children that are signals that this could be a problem? Well, first of all, I think it's become, unfortunately, the norm that when children have a screen within arm's reach, chances are, if they're bored, if there's a commercial on TV, they're going to reach for it. Right? It's just become part of our culture, right? And for better or for worse, that's something as parents that we want to always be vigilant about, we want to be aware of, and we want to have conversations with our children about that. But if your child, as I mentioned before, if your child has any of these symptoms of attention deficit, of depression or anxiety, if they have a learning disability, or if they have autism spectrum disorder, it doesn't mean that they're all going to be addicted. But in my experience, I've seen that children with those diagnoses tend to be more drawn to the screens. Sometimes they're drawn to the screens because the attention deficit disorder child needs that additional stimulation and it's very rewarding for them. Other times, children with depression or anxiety are feeling social isolation. Children on the autism spectrum may find their social community online, so it makes a lot of sense that they would be drawn to these devices. Children with learning disorders may experience a lot of stress from the academics, and so rather than make their way through the frustration of writing and figuring out those math problems, it's much easier just to pick up their phone, scroll through social media, and unfortunately we know what happens when that becomes too much of a problem. So if your child falls into any of those categories, any of those diagnoses that I was describing, then as a parent you have to be extra vigilant and be sensitive to the fact that they are going to be more drawn to the devices. But still, don't let that stop you from creating limits. The most important thing you can do is have conversations that are sensitive. Please have these conversations with compassion and love and understanding, but make a point to your children to make sure that they understand that they need to learn to have a relationship with their devices that is set by limits so that they can put them down, that they can turn them off, so that they can go to sleep, so that they can do their responsibilities, get their schoolwork done. And also remember, you have to be extra vigilant because your children are fighting these symptoms of these diagnoses, and we want to make sure that they're equipped to make their way through childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood equipped with healthy coping styles and healthy coping skills so that they're not just relying on these screens. So the best thing I can recommend to parents is have this conversation, talk with your children about balance, If you are a parent of a child who is not in any activities, who doesn't have any extracurricular activities, or a teenager that doesn't have any place to go on the weekends, find some activities for your children. Sit down with them. Ask them about things that they'd like to do outside of the screens, and they should be able to engage in these activities. This is one of the most important things that you can do for your child because it's going to teach them social play, it's going to teach them social emotional development. They're going to be engaging with other people their age in healthy activities. It might involve exercise, it might involve dance, it might involve learning an instrument. But those kinds of activities are going to offset the time that they spend on their screens. And the end result is that you'll have a healthy child, a healthier teenager, and ultimately a healthy young adult who's ready to move into full adulthood. And so parents, I just want to let you know, if you're having a tough time enforcing these consequences in your house on your own, it might be time to seek professional help.